everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, depending on whatever you might be today. Welcome to our second webinar of the 7th call, during which we'd like to zoom into specific examples and introduce you to a case study we have developed extra for today's webinar. My name is Rodina Vasileva. I work at the technical support unit of the NAMA facility, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. And together with my two colleagues, who you'll meet in a second, we'll guide you through the content of our presentation. First of all, we'd like to thank you for your interest in the 7th call of the NAMA facility. By the latest count, we had about 100 participants registered for this webinar, and we're happy to see such a huge turnout and interest. Let's take a look at today's agenda. We want to first start with a look at the 7th call timeline, as well as touch upon the implication of COVID, where we would like to ask for your input, as well as as we try to analyze the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on project developers in partner countries. Second, as I've already just hinted, we'd like to introduce you to the NSP Totinia carbon neutral, a mock project outline in the fictitious country of Totinia, which we here at the TSU have developed and want to introduce you to as an example. We want to highlight that we do not claim that this project encompasses a perfect project design. On the contrary, we want to use the opportunity to discuss certain specific features with you. Last but not least, we'll also take a look and briefly revisit the 7th call application documents. As in previous webinars, we'll also have 2 Q&A sessions where we'll address incoming questions. Let me introduce to you the webinar hosts. Myself, Rodina, I'm on the far left. Second, we have Zoran in the middle, the head of the technical support unit.
Hello and good afternoon.
And last, but not least, is Dalia on the right.
Hello.
Before we jump into the further details of today's webinar, let me also walk you through the webinar's control panel, which you can see here on the right side of the PowerPoint slide. Feel free to follow along on the screen as I walk you through some of the key settings with my mouse. One of that you should be aware of and would be relevant to you throughout the webinar today. First, you can hide and unhide the control panel using this button right here. You can also view the webinar in full screen using this button right here. This could be useful as the session is accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation. And then last, right here, using the globe, you can also adjust the language of the control panel. There's also the question tab here at the bottom, where we ask you to submit any questions you might have throughout the session. Due to the high number of participants, we have muted everyone, so please submit your questions in the chat. To do so, you can type your question in the tab window and click send. The webinar hosts, will be the only ones who can see it, and we'll address incoming questions in the Q&A sessions after each section. So make sure you submit them beforehand. In the event that there are more questions than we can answer today, we will answer those questions after the webinar and publish them on our website as part of the next clarification notes. The webinar will also be recorded and be published on our website. And finally, in this webinar's presentations, there are several links to further sources of information, and these will also be available in the uploaded PDF of this presentation that we'll publish together with the recording of today's webinar. Now, before any further ado, let's jump into the first topic, the update on the 7th call. And I would like to hand the word over to Dalia. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. As you probably might know by now, the 7th call was launched on 1st April. Applicants are invited to submit their outline till 1st September. While the call is open, the technical support unit will be answering your questions and clarifying any misconception that applicants might have. In the previous webinar that was hosted on April, we have revised the whole process of the 7th call in detail. So if you haven't had the chance to attend the introduction to the 7th call webinar, we highly encourage you to check it out on our website. We would like to highlight that the NAMA facility website has a handful of resources available. We encourage applicants to check the available resources in the NAMA facility website. Like I said before, there is a webinar that provides an introduction to the 7th call as well as lessons learned from the 6th call and previous calls as well. We also have other webinars that dive deep into certain topics such as the financial mechanism. Besides webinar, we also have many documents and publications that provide details on key topics such as NSP's potential for transformational change, the Sustainable Development Co-benefits in the NAMA facility, monitoring and evaluation framework, and answers to frequently asked questions. I'm sorry, we're just facing some technical difficulties. So while the call is open, the technical support unit will collect questions regarding the 7th call and publish this in what we call clarification notes in our website. So if you have any question, please do not hesitate to submit your question to our contact email. We have already published our 2nd round of publication notes, and you can find them on our website. And all questions raised today will also be included in the next clarification note, which will be published in 2 weeks. Okay. So the TSU is trying to assess the implication of COVID-19. The TSU will closely monitor the effect that COVID-19 might have on the 7th call. One way we plan to do this is by setting up an online questionnaire that allows anonymized participation via the NAMA facilities website. There is a possibility that minor refinement might be introduced in the 7th call due to the implication arising from corona. For instance, there is a possibility that the outline template might be extended as well as the deadline. So this is a questionnaire that I just talked about, and it contains 5 questions that revolves around the challenges that the applicant might face in submitting the outline on time and how the NAMA facility can help overcome those challenges. The first one says, do COVID-19 related challenges prevent you from submitting a complete NSP outline to the NAMA facility by 1st September? And if the answer to that is yes, please specify what exactly would prevent you from submitting an NSP outline. For example, it could be limited possibility to travel to the country to have consultation with key stakeholders or restricted interest of partner governments due to other priorities. So these are just some of the examples. And the 3rd question says, if you face challenges in submitting complete NSP outline on time, how much additional time would you need for a complete submission? The 4th question is, do you anticipate other COVID-19 related challenges for your NSP outline submission that the NAMA facility should be aware of? And if so, that has to be specified as well. And lastly, what can the NAMA facility do to help you overcome the COVID-19 related challenges for your NSP outline submission? This questionnaire will help establish a basis for a decision on a possible refinement in the call process. Please note that the optional anonymizations shall assure potential respondent that their response will have no impact on the assessment of their NSP outline. You are welcome to leave your feedback on this in the question tab. The questionnaire has already been published. You can find the questionnaire in the homepage of the NAMA facility website, and we have also included a link to the questionnaire here as well. We invite the listeners to provide their input by the end of June. This questionnaire would allow the donors to take a decision on potential amendments in the call process. We will provide the feedback from donors by July this year.
Thank you, Dalia, for providing us with a snapshot on where we are on the 7th call, as well as discussing the implication of what we're trying to do here at the TSU as far as assessing the implications of COVID-19 on the 7th call. Before we jump into discussion and presenting the merits of the mock outline we have developed and we want to present it to you, I'll hand over the word back to Dalia, who will remind everyone and walk us through briefly through the NSP outline itself, and she'll highlight also which features we'll walk into in more detail as part of the NSP presentation.
Okay, so now I'll present the information that must be included in the outline document. As you can see here on the slide, the outline template consists of 4 sections, which are the general information on the NSP concept, NSP ambition, and lastly, expected budget and financing structure of NSP implementation. And now I will cover each one of them in the next slides. The first section of the outline template revolves around the general information of the NSP, such as the duration of the DPP and implementation phase, funding volume requested from the NAMA facility, names of national ministries, applicant support partner, main implementing partners, and NAMA support organization. In 1.2, applicants are asked to describe what the NSP wants to do in a single sentence, and in 1.3, applicants must describe what will have changed through the NSP at the end of its implementation, and again in 1 sentence. Please note that we are going to revisit point 1.2 and 1.3. In the second section of the outline, the concept of the NSP should be discussed in greater detail, starting by providing the key barrier analysis on what's preventing transformational change in the greenhouse gas emission trends in the subsector, and what the government and other actors are doing to overcome the key barriers. In the project rationale part, applicants must specify how the NSP addresses the key barriers that are mentioned. In addition, the objective, scope, and the target group of the NSP must be explained well. The third part is about the project concept, which includes the business model, financial support mechanism, and capacity building. Here, applicants are expected to elaborate on the technologies, intervention, behavior changes to be supported, as well as the business model related to these technologies and intervention from the user's end. Lastly, the key milestones and activities during the NSP implementation phase must also be included in this part. In the last part of this section, applicants are expected to provide insights into the national climate policy context, including the nationally determined contribution, mitigation strategy, and plans to address the climate change in the sector. Applicants should describe the sector policy and its linkage to NDC, as well as the greenhouse gas relevance to the sector. Please note that we are going to revisit 2.1 and 2.3 later. The third section of the NSP outline focuses on the ambition of the NSP, and this is measured by looking at the NSP's potential for transformational change with regard to its sustainability, replicability, and whether the NSP will have a catalytic effect. In the financial ambition part, applicant must provide a description of the financial ambition of the NSP and mobilization of funds from different entities. In the mitigation impact part, the calculation from direct and indirect mitigation potential must be provided. In Annex 6, we provide guidance and instruction on how the calculation can be made. We are also, again, going to revisit the whole section 3. And the last section of the outline, which is expected budget and financing structure of the NSP implementation, applicants must provide the overall cost and financing contribution from the different financing sources for the implementation phase.
Thank you, Dalia, for walking us through the outline template. And just as a reminder for everyone, the outline template and additional mandatory annexes can be found on our website under the 7th call. And without any further ado, I would like to hand over now to the very anticipated NSP Totinia.
Yeah, thanks very much, Radina. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to present this mock outline to potential applicants. Before we go into some of the details and features of this particular mock project, we'd like to start with a forward which basically consists of a couple of carve-outs we would like to make at this instance. So we have been asked a couple of times by potential applicants and also ourselves, we've been always curious to see an outline which once in a while was described as a silver bullet or a holy grail. Greetings to all people listening now who are our alumni and who were part of discussion in the past. So there's a couple of advantages and disadvantages of doing that, and I would like to point out that this approach, of course, of presenting an outline is supposed to be purely fictional. So this outline has been invented by ourselves and it should be kept as that. We wanted to present and describe an NSP which does provide a promising prospect, but of course we cannot really say that it would be successful in a nanofacility call, as that would of course depend on the totality of other NSP outlines to be presented. You will see in the following that we will present the outline from the perspective of the outline, and simply wanted to make that sure that you understand that we take that perspective for the sake of argument. We have chosen to select a project which intervenes in the CITES context and focuses on RE, renewable energy technologies. That is rather coincidental and it's not supposed to predetermine any success chances of this or projects stemming from other sectors. It simply allows for a relatively succinct and short presentation. That's why we chose it. We tried to present the outline with as little specific figures and also annexes as possible, to simply allow to concentrate on explanations in the train of thoughts to describe a given project. The objective of this whole exercise is at least fourfold. We would like to showcase how a promising NSP outline might look like in its totality. We would like to illustrate how information can be portrayed within the limited space that we as the TSU allow for such an outline. At the same time, we wanted to display some of the complexities and partly maybe also contradictions you might experience when you develop and present a project. And then lastly, by all this, we definitely would like to reduce the barrier to work on the text sequences required for an NSP outline, and thus encourage everybody to work on it. It's not rocket science, you can make it. Should you have questions, please formulate them in our GoToWebinar function as we move along, and we try to get back to them in the course of the Q&A session. Last but not least, in terms of the distribution of roles, we will be presenting this outline. So I will take the role of a representative of the government of Totinia, presenting this NSP outline, and Radina will comment on the merits of the NSP as a TSU assessor, which is. And finally, disclaimer, the story, all names and features portrayed in this NSP outline are purely fictitious. No identification with real circumstances is intended or should be inferred. Any undue copying of this NSP or any part thereof would be highly disappointing. That's of course one of the fears we have. If you guys start copy-pasting what we've used in this outline, that would not be good. So, kicking it off with an overview on NSP Totinia on one page. The project will intervene in the Sustainable Republic of Totinia, and we'll have a glimpse of what the country looks like on one of the next slides. As I mentioned already, the project is intended to intervene in renewable energies with a focus on a wide range of technologies actually. There will be solar PV installations on 2 of the 21 islands of Totinia. There's supposed to be wind parks on 1 island, which is particularly well suited for their technology, which is called Vencia. And there will be grid extensions on Vencia, and more importantly, connecting Vencia with the main island grid of the main island Capitalia. and another grid connection between the neighboring island of Vitoria once again to the Capitalia main grid. Applicant support partner for this particular NSP is the Think Green and Big company, which is a non-for-profit LLP based in Capitalia. And you can see also here details on the budget. What we found interesting with this NSP is to display actually a case where you can see that we do allow and that there might be an opportunity to tap into funding which goes beyond our usual threshold of 20 million. For that matter, you can see here that budget line on Vitoria with another 7 million euros, which is basically an add-on to the basic budget. The project, we believe, could survive and be well established without that component, but you'll listen in a second to why we believe that it would be a suitable add-on. That's just a display on what the outline actually looks like. So you can see we did manage to cover it on 16 pages with less than 8,000 words. So that it is a very short and succinct story we have put together, which covers all the questions that have to be addressed. We will publish that outline as part of the documentation of this webinar once we provide the recording and the PowerPoint slides of this webinar. As I mentioned already before, here is a glimpse on the archipelago of Totinia, and you can see here to the left that the archipelago is based in the middle of the magnificent ocean, bordering countries to the north, Northandia, and to the south, Nerania. And then there is a neighboring archipelago which is called Emerodia. Zooming into Totinia on the right-hand side on this beautiful map, you can see Totinia with its main island, Capitalia, where you also have the majority of the population. All in all, on the 4 inhabited islands of Totinia, there is approximately 200,000 inhabitants. It's a lower middle income country which has its focus in economic terms on fisheries, textile and tourism industry. And I wanted to highlight 2 aspects on this map here. You can see the existing established grid connection between the island of Solaria and Capitalia, and you can see to the west the 2 islands of Vencia and Vitoria. We'll get back to them later on, where the intended additional grid connections between these neighboring islands to the main grid of Capitalia are supposed to be established. Thanks again for these maps. Again, they are a product of homeschooling by Luisa Emeline. Thanks, Luisa. Okay, as Daria mentioned already, we wanted to go through certain sections of the outline document to simply highlight the information portrayed therein. And I'd like to take the opportunity to explicitly read out 2 key elements of the outline document, which are 1.2 and 1.3, and they concern really the basic information on the NSP and what it is targeting to do. So on 1.1, the question is, what is the NSP about? And we as the government of Totinia managed to put it into 1 question, which is a bit longish, but I'll read it out anyway. So this NSP supports Totinia to transform its electricity sector by replacing fossil-based power generation capacities by wind, solar and hydropower of at least X megawatts, thus largely decoupling the country from the use of fossil fuels. Once again, we kept a lot of figures blank in this outline for the reasons I mentioned before. On 1.3, once again, I'd like to read out the response we found for that particular aspect, which covers the question, what will have changed at the end of the NSP? So our answer would be, the power sector will be transformed as the electricity generation capacities will have shifted away from fossil fuel towards renewable energy sources. The provision of electricity services will be largely improved with less power outages, enhanced grid stability and less fluctuations in prices. Investment into key assets for a transformed power generation sector of an equivalent of X million euros will be made by NEWS, which is the utility of Totinia, local and foreign investors, as well as banks. And lastly, the governance and the financial stability of NEWS as the privately owned utility of Totinia will be improved, and at the same time, Totinia's carbon neutral pathway will have a positive impact on its marketing potential as a destination for sustainable inclusion. Moving on to section 2.1, the barrier analysis, you will see in the outline document itself that we came across a relatively large variety of barriers, and we made sure in the project concept that we suitably engage with those barriers. But just to name a few, we classified them here for the sake of presentation into four categories. On financial aspects, there is currently no financial incentive to invest in renewable energy capacities, including a lack of concessional finance by public international sources. And also there is limited knowledge, trust, and also track record of financial institutions and local investors participating in tenders and investing into renewable energy. On the second category of regulatory barriers, there is one which strikes out and also can be seen in connection with the financial barrier mentioned just now, as there is an insufficient level of conditions to operate renewable energy capacities and promote feed-in of electricity to the grid. On institutional aspects and capacities, there are two barriers we'd like to mention here. There is limited capacities to plan for and tender renewable energy generation capacities, operate them and integrate them into the existing grid. So that pertains to the capacities within use as the utility of Totinia. And then secondly, there's also insufficient private sector know-how and capacities to provide renewable energy generation and feed them into the grid. Last but not least, on barriers, we'd like to point out that the overarching theme, you could say, which is preventing rollout of renewable energies in the country, is the lack of suitable infrastructure. So the non-existence of grid connections between the mentioned islands of Totinia is really one main barrier and hindrance to further roll out renewable energy. And that has to be seen also in the context of limited land surface on Totinia, where there is simply not enough place to have all the renewable energy installations on Capitalia itself. So that's why it's key to connect those two neighboring islands to the main grid. On 2.3 of the outline document, which pertains to the project concept. In terms of financial mechanisms, we would like to propose three different interventions. So related to the international tender to identify IPPs to invest in the renewable energy generation assets, the NSP would provide a partial guarantee for partial payments to IPPs, which are due in US dollars, and those payments are due, of course, by NEWS as the public utility who would be buying the electricity from the IPPs. And it's a recurrent feature in international practice that IPPs investing in projects are seeking comfort to receive their recurring payments for electricity sales. And it's typically a bottleneck that the financial strength of utilities paying for such remuneration is limited. So we try to provide some additional comfort there. Secondly, it is intended to provide investment support for the grid extensions on Vencia itself, which is one of the neighboring islands, and then also on the underwater grid connection, the underwater cable connecting Vencia to Capitalia.
Søren, could I please interrupt you for a second? If I may, I would like to maybe pose a follow-up question to what you just proposed, taking into account my role and view as the TSU assessor, looking at this outline and this project design. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on what kind of financial investment you're presenting here?
Okay, you're asking with regard to this second intervention now, right?
Yeah.
With regard
what is the financial instrument you're...
Okay, all right. Well, we believe that to establish the grid connection between Vence and Capitalia, the owner of that grid extension will be News. So they will need to provide a certain amount of equity, but there will be a relatively high portion of that investment to be provided by debt. And we would like to provide support for that instrument. So that is supposed to make the provision of debt more attractive for commercial banks, which we believe might be a local commercial bank to do that, and also make the repayment of that debt more feasible for News as the uptaker of this loan and the owner of the grid. It's not yet defined what exactly that mechanism will look like, but we are looking into options on mechanisms such as interest rate subsidies and upfront grace periods for News to have an easier way of paying back that debt. More details on the specifications of that particular financial mechanisms will be developed and ready at the end of the detailed preparation phase.
Sounds like a suitable activity to be incorporated as part of a DPP if such a project is to be selected.
Okay, then maybe let me get to the third financial mechanism we intend to use. So that would be the financial support to the underwater grid connection to Hydroria. There we think we will need to use, given the nature of the project and another financial institution involved, it will probably need to be a straightforward subsidy we will be using in that instance. Moving on to technical interventions, so modes of technical assistance in terms of implementing the NSP. You will see that there is a wider range of interventions in the outline document, but we wanted to zoom into the four aspects mentioned here. We believe it's quite central to strengthen the capacities of the staff of the national utility News to plan and operate a grid with an increasing share of power from renewable energy.
Okay. Could you maybe provide us a bit more information here with what kind of activities have been engaged in the past, or what are in general the capacities of News? What are we starting from scratch, or?
Currently there is basically no renewable energy generated electricity in the Annex of Totinia. It is true that there is so far quite limited capacities also of the staff to handle with such aspects. However, there have been previous activities supported by the government of Nordandia, so we will not be starting from scratch, but we will be tapping into work that has already been done. And we can also tap into experience made in the neighboring country of Nerania, where a comparable scheme has been implemented. So the technical assistance of the NSP envisages to tie up with both work already done on Totinia, but also to encourage an exchange of expertise with the neighboring country of Nerania. Okay, maybe I could expand on further aspects of the technical assistance. One key aspect to attract IPP investment into renewables will be that the tendering processes on Totinia will be improved. There's more information in the outline document itself, what has happened already and how the overall macroeconomic framework conditions have already been improved on the back of previous donor-funded interventions. And we are pretty confident that framework conditions can be tailor-made to a situation where a private investment, both from local but more importantly from international investors, can be attracted. Thirdly, we would like to support private sector institutions, notably those on Totinia itself, to be able to profit from the NSP and the investment which is done.
Could you be a bit more specific and elaborate on who exactly would be benefiting from such interventions?
Well, we try to quantify.
Also in terms of co-benefit.
Yeah, we try to quantify the job creation potential of this NSP, and we came to the conclusion that it is probably rather limited at scale. The reason being that there is no relevant industry so far on Totinia, given that it's such a small and remote country. That is why we believe that most of the equipment to be installed will need to be tendered abroad and shipped into the country. So in terms of manufacturing capacities, we believe that the job potential of this NSP will be limited. There is some structures of renewable energy assets which might be suitable for local production, such as foundations for wind turbines or also mounting structures for solar PV installations. And that might be areas where, to a limited degree, a local manufacturing might play a role. And then in terms of operation and maintenance, there might be an additional edge in terms of job creation. But we would like to underline that job creation is probably not the main driver of this particular NSP. Coming to the last aspect on technical assistance, we are keen to enhance the capacities of national government and notably of our ministry in charge of climate change to enhance and reinforce our existing national MRV system to actually track CO2 emissions and also track the success of our mitigation activities.
I'd like to intervene here as well, not a particular question, but an observation that this is an interesting feature, an approach that actually we have seen in a lot of our NSPs and a lot of our submissions, which is to track and to build and to track the national emissions and support the national government. And this is a feature that we welcome and strongly recommend as part of project designs.
Okay, thanks very much. We're glad to hear that. Coming to some of the aspects of the third part of the NSP outline, which zooms into aspects of ambition, and I quickly like to run you on all three subcategories in this part of the outline. Starting off with 3.1, transformational change. We've already basically mentioned it under 1.3. So just to repeat it again, the NSP targets sector-wide transformation of electricity generation in the whole country as the main source of emissions in Totinia over a short period of time. As you will see from the outline document, the impact we will have on the scale of our country will be actually quite wide, and the NSP alone will be able to trigger a really vast difference in our local economy.
This is interesting, and I would like to follow up on this aspect as well. It is quite unique and interesting that you're targeting a whole sector-wide approach, but I would like to also, one of our criteria that we're looking at, and one aspect is what about scalability and replication of the activities you're engaging in. What we see and would like to see from our projects is that there's a clear picture and vision of how further replication could be done.
Yeah, that is probably a limitation of our NSP, which comes along with the limited size of our country. I mean, the fact that we will be transforming a whole sector in itself will mean that there will be no further room for upscaling in our beloved country. But of course, there will be the opportunity to use lessons learned of this project in other comparable SITS contexts. So we think that the lessons we will be learning, and it's actually part of the activities we will be engaging as key milestones of our NSP implementation towards the end of the NSP, will be to share those lessons learned on Totinia with other countries in comparable country context, so that replication might actually take place in other countries. Is that fine?
Sure, thank you.
Great. Moving on to 3.2 on financial ambition. This is the only instance where we did provide some specific figures, and I think the point we wanted to make with that is that you see it here in the leverage factor actually we are generating. So if you take the budget of the NSP, which we have portrayed a bit further up on the general overview of the NSP, you will have noticed that there is a share of 7 million euros, which would be provided for the connection to Hydroria. And that is really the reason why the overall budget of the NSP goes beyond 20 million. But it's also the factor which would actually have a quite substantial positive effect on a further increased leverage. It will notably jump from 1 to 6.3 to 1 to 7.7 because there is such a massive amount of additional investing stemming from both public and private sources to fund that project on Hydroria. So we simply wanted to bring that to your attention, as it is the main reason why we opted to also include that aspect into the NSP implementation. You will see from the outline document that the hydropower pumping scheme on Hydroria is really a key aspect to ensure that the whole power sector, as the main source of carbon emissions on Totinia, will become neutral in future. So we believe that it is really key to include this component to the NSP. However, if the NAMA facility should decide that this component is too expensive, or for whatever other reason would not like to accept funding it, we believe that even without the project of Hydroria, without that specific component, the NSP as such will still be worthwhile being funded.
Thank you for this summary on the financial ambition of this project. I would like to make just one quick remark from the TSU perspective. This is an interesting case which we do not see quite often, and actually quite seldom. As part of the last call, we had no such suggestions, but in general we are open to NSPs, to projects requesting more than 20 million if and when they have an interesting story to tell, and there's a strong justification that goes beyond the 20 million as you just described.
Okay, great. I'd like to come to the last point of my presentation, and that pertains to 3.3, which is the mitigation ambition of our NSP. Once again, you will see in the outline document itself a description of how we came to that particular calculation. It is basically a multiplier of the emission factor of our existing 4 diesel run power generation plants with the kilowatt hours we produce at a given time. That mitigation potential, I think it's worth noting, represents more than 2/3 of all of Totinia's emissions. So if we achieve to suppress that demand from diesel to run our electricity generation capacities, we would have already achieved more than our current NDC of the country of Totinia had as a target. So it would be a massive improvement, and it's the single biggest source of emissions in our country.
I have just one last remark in regards to the mitigation potential. I think you brought up a fair point that in the context of the SIDS, the mitigation potential might be in absolute terms quite low, but I wanted to stress out that from the TSU perspective, we always assess the NSP outlines in a specific country context, while we also try to ensure that the funding from the NAMO facility is used most efficiently. So in this case, would be looking at in the context of SIDS and what would be the absolute, in relation to the national emissions, what reduction would be achieved. Looking at the time, we're actually quite overshot, and I'm not quite sure whether we'll be able to have 2 Q&A sessions. But first, I would like to thank you, Zoran, for walking us through this project design and this outline, which will be also published on our website, as we've mentioned before, together with the recording of this webinar. I would like to open the floor, actually, for a few questions. Or actually, no, looking at the time, I think we still have 2 minutes. We can take the 2 minutes to give you a bit of summary and a bit of feedback from the TSU perspective on this project, this design you've just presented. And thank you for being patient with me and interrupting you almost at every step of your presentation to ask some follow-up questions. But this has been an interesting presentation for me as well, since this is really the first time I get to hear it. So I will have to improvise a little bit on my take on this project design. But what I would like to stress is that from what we've heard today is that this project design carries a lot of merits in terms of, on one side, it seems to have a strong national embeddedness and country support. On one side, it is embedded in the national policy, as Zoran already described. It targets 100% carbon neutrality, and the NSP would directly target and support that. And on the other side, we'd also see on the slide that there's quite a substantial national contribution that would support this claim. We saw that there is quite an extensive and strong barrier analysis, which serves as the basis for this NSP design and project approach, and it builds on quite a lot of lessons learned in the region, and has the possibility to upscale, and this is the transformational also effect, that we would be able to be upscaled and replicated in the region. One thing that I've noted is that there's quite a substantial, I mean, we said whole sector approach, but it's targeting 3 technologies, which were always a bit careful, not always, but what I want to say is that would need to be ensured during a DPP that a direct to ensure that the proposed intervention could handle, and the project design can handle the implementation of so many aspects. The last point that we mentioned was the mitigation potential. I mean, this is a SIDS context, so the absolute mitigation would be low, but as I said, the country context is what we look at, also in relation to the national policies as outlined in the NDCs. This would be a great, from what you've described, would be seen as a positive aspect. So since we have a little bit of time left, I would propose that we skip this Q&A session and jump into our next session, which is going to be rather brief. It's the seventh. I'd like to give the word over to Dalia, who would walk us to the 7th call application documents, and afterwards, so bear with us. It's only 2 slides, and then afterwards we can do one Q&A session where we can address all of your questions.
Okay, thank you, Radina. So now, due to the lack of time, I'll quickly go through the application document, which includes the outline template and the required annexes. Now, it's important to note that the outline template and the accompanying documents have undergone some revision. On one side, the outline template has an even lighter structure than the last call. Also, we still suggest that a completed NSP outline should total no more than 10,000 words or roughly 20 pages, excluding the annexes. In a change from last year's call, there are now 6, not 7 mandatory annexes that you have to submit together with the NSP outline. And just to briefly examine what they are, next one involves the endorsement letter from national ministries. Annex 2 is a log frame, which is a planning instrument for project development. The third annex serves the purpose to provide information and references regarding the legal entity, which is to become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. In Annex 4, applicants are asked to describe their DPP concept and activity plan and to provide the detailed DPP budget. Annex 5 is on the business model and the financial mechanism. And lastly, Annex 6 is on the greenhouse gas mitigation potential, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. It is important to know that Annex 6 has been revised to provide further clarity and guidance and offer a more consistent presentation of the mitigation potential. In Annex 6, applicants must estimate the direct and indirect mitigation impact from the NSP. In the same file, we provide references to useful guidance and methodologies that can be used for the calculation of greenhouse emission reduction. The list also provides recommendation and orientation regarding available standard that is useful for applicants. TSU is currently preparing a video that provides more information on this annex and also presents a fictional project with filled-in Annex 6. This video will be published in the NAMO facility website by the first week of June.
Thank you, Dalia, for walking us quickly through the application documents, and thank you all for your patience again. This is quite exciting that we have another case example, actually 2 of them coming on our website next week to walk through the Annex 6, so do keep an eye out on that. And then with this, I would like to jump into the first and only Q&A session. And we have some questions that have come in the meantime, and I'd like to take them into a thematic order. So there are a few questions on the coronavirus and the implications on the 7th call. The question says, could you be a bit more specific about when a decision on the possible refinement of the process on the 7th call could be taken and announced? Dalia, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I just said, we'd launched a questionnaire on our website to help assess the implication of COVID-19 on project developers and partner countries. The questionnaire will be up on our website until the end of June. It is likely that we would hold a donor call in July, and this topic, implication of COVID-19 on the 7th call, could be discussed at this occasion. But please know that we will also have a webinar in July, on 14 July to be more specific, and we may or may not be in a position to provide you with more details then.
Thank you. There's one more question on COVID. How likely is it that the submission deadline for outlines would be extended?
Okay, this is a very good question, and to be honest with you, nobody really knows. There are many factors in play here and so many moving pieces, so we cannot make an official statement today. The first step is for us to try to understand the impact on and the need of project developers, and it is only then that we can decide on how we can react. So right now we rely on hearing from you and on better understanding the situation and implication.
Thank you. And I think one of our listeners missed out and was asking about whether the outline that we just presented would be published on our website, and the answer is yes. First, but I would like to stress and reiterate again that the story, names, features portrayed are all fictional, and it would be highly disappointing if there would be any copying of this NSP or any parts This is only fictitious, and we wanted to use the opportunity to showcase how a promising outline might look like, illustrate how information can be portrayed in a limited space, as well as to try to reduce barriers associated with the work and the text sequences required, as well as display some of the complexities that might be involved. So please be careful and keep these in mind. Looking at the time, we are nonetheless still running out of time, and there are still a few questions that are quite specific. And what I would suggest, and this is something that we always do, is that we'll get back to those questions specifically after this webinar, and we are going to publish all the questions we have gone over and have not gone over as part of our clarification notes that would be published on June 24th. And I wanted to remind you all again that we do have one more planned webinar as part of the 7th call on July 14th, for which you can also register and keep track on our website. And if you have any further questions that you might not have been able to post today, do please reach out to us at our contact email listed on this slide. And just to reiterate again, we have a dedicated page for the 7th call where all the information regarding this call can be found, and there's a link on our website. And lastly, please share the information with everyone who might be interested. And with this, I wanted to thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and we hope that what we presented to you was helpful and useful, and we wish you success in developing your outline and project designs. And with this, have a good day, have a good evening, and goodbye.